UFOs are real and all this stuff, I noticed that all of a sudden you would get this other group of people. It would kind of try to debunk it or try to make those people look, bad.
Well, you get that all along. I mean, there has been a systematic effort to not only debunk any sighting imaginable. There's a case where a pilot, his navigator, co-pilot, and a flight attendant saw a UFO for an extended period of time. Their transcripts are recorded with the control tower, and afterwards, one of the debunkers said, it was probably just a firefly trapped between the two layers of glass of the windshield that they saw, not a UFO at all. Now, when that many people who are trained observers, and they have to be to fly jets, see something, I think they can tell the difference between a firefly and a UFO outside the plane. And secondly, it doesn't explain how that firefly could survive at 40,000 feet in sub-zero temperatures and still be flitting around and blinking.
Well, the average person wouldn't think about that, though, Rob.
Well, I think most people, I don't know, I mean, most people are interested in the topic. I think they do think rather deeply about it. I think they do question, and I certainly would question that guy's response because it seemed almost ludicrous in the extreme.
Now, almost as ludicrous as swamp gas.
Exactly. Swamp gas or hot air balloons or the usual. I mean, it's just gone on for generations. I don't think people buy it anymore. I mean, with UFOs, countless tens of thousands of people have witnessed them. Property has been damaged. People have been injured. People have been killed by them, and a lot more than most people realize. And the sightings go on, and also there's all these disappearances and the abductions, over 1 million of them alone in the United States. And some of the bodies that we have found, and I'm not talking about cattle here, are horribly mutilated like cattle and treated with total disrespect by whoever did it to them, and did it to them while they were alive, and without the benefit of any kind of anesthesia. In the one case with one man was found on the banks of the Billings Reservoir in Brazil in 1988, they say that the coroner reported that he had to have been alive at the time, and so some other means of paralysis had to be used on him because there was no sign of restraints in him struggling. But they said that the cause of his death seemed to be the fact that he had pulmonary and heart failure due to extreme trauma, and the coroner said torture. So whatever's being done to these people is being done to them while they're alive and they're awake, and they are going through this. And I mean, absolutely horrible stuff. Sucking out their organs through small holes in their body, draining all the blood out of them. I mean, this is like cattle mutilations. This one guy had his eyes cut out, his eyelids removed, part of his lip and lower face, part of his jawbone removed. He had his internal organs sucked out through small holes in his armpits. He had muscles and other flesh sucked out through tiny holes in his arms and legs. He had his entire upper and lower intestine removed, all of his colon, and it left a huge gaping hole where his rectum should have been. He had been castrated, his testicles removed. This is not pleasant. I mean, if it's happening to you, I don't think you're going to think it's hey, this is a lot of fun kind of thing.
Well, it's something I sure wouldn't want to go through. It tells me if I did that to a person, I'd be locked up forever. So these aliens, what they're doing, because there's a group of people out there that think aliens are here to help man, to save the world, to give people enhancements. But, I've had a lot of people on my show, and one of them, even Calvin Parker, he's been on my show, I think, 2 or 3 times, and we were talking about his abduction. And, that he's started suffering pain when this female creature was trying to put her fingers down his throat and come out of his nose. And he was not under when that was going on, and I guess he was screaming. That's what he remembers. But this is kind of like really scary, that some of the things they have done to people, and then, people will sit there and say they're here to serve man. I did ask Calvin, and I asked all my guests that's ever been on my show when they claim that they have been abducted. I asked them, do you think they're here friendly to serve man, or are they here for like evil? And I hear more the response is they're here, they're evil. They're evil.
Oh, in a way, that's the response that I get. And, of course, a lot of people are made to forget, and only under hypnosis does it come back. But they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. They have horrible memories, nightmares, and this is what leads them to get the hypnotism. But just because you're made to forget something doesn't mean it didn't happen to you. And some people say, well, some of the aliens are bad, but some are our space brothers. And I said, well, if there are space brothers, why aren't they interfering? Oh, well, they have a non-interference agreement where they don't want to interfere with our culture. They want it to develop naturally. I said, how is it developing naturally if the bad, let's call them bad aliens or extraterrestrials, are doing this to us? And how can you consider them good or space brothers if they're standing idly by while this is happening to us? And then they said, well, maybe they're so advanced they treat us like ants. I said, little children, little boys might burn ants with a magnifying glass, but adults don't usually behave that way because we've grown and we have a sense of morals and ethics. Don't these people have it too?
Well, maybe they don't. That's the whole problem. Because when we reflect on people's morals, right, we go by how we were brought up. Now, I have to admit, people have changed a lot. I remember being, the 50s was my years growing up. And like Leave It to Beaver, Donna Reed Show, all those type of things where people were more united as a family, which has changed drastically in the 70s and the 80s and what we have nowadays. But the compassion back then was a lot more than it is now. But they weren't brought up the way you or I were brought up or the listeners were brought up. So when people say they feel compassion, how do they know what they feel? They might not feel any compassion at all. I mean, do you feel compassion when you go out your front door and by the time you get to your car, you killed probably 1,000 insects? Do you feel compassion for all those lower lives that you just killed walking to your car?
Well, yeah, this may sound a little strange, but yeah, I kind of do. I don't kill bugs in my house. I slip a card underneath them and put a glass over them, lift them, and take them and push them out the door. I've even done it with a couple of wasps. I feed feral cats. I feed birds. I feed raccoons. I feed possums. So, yeah, I'm kind of in that bracket that is that compassionate. Not to say I haven't burned a few ants when I was a rotten little kid about the age of 8 or 9 years old, with a magnifying glass. But again, supposedly you outgrow that. And I don't think that we're any more compassionate or less compassionate than the people now, just because we had a bunch of shows that pretended we were that way in the 1950s. The 1950s really wasn't that way. I mean, it really wasn't Leave It to Beaver. It wasn't really Father Knows Best. I mean, the divorce rate was skyrocketing in the 1950s. Families were splitting. But you didn't see that in any of those shows in the 1950s because they were reflecting the ideal of what a family should be in the 1950s rather than the actuality of what they were. So I don't think millennials today are any less compassionate than we are. They might have stress on different things that they consider important than we do, but I think they're just as human as we were in our generation.
I don't know. I've had 8 children, and, the oldest is in his 40s now. And I could see, how, they grew up, is this, they're not as close knit as I remember when I was a kid. Like we'd have Christmas and, all our family would get together on Christmas, any holiday. We'd get together as a family. Nowadays, nobody has time for it. So I do think society has changed in somewhat. But when it comes to these creatures or whatever you want to call them, if they didn't grow up the way we grew up, they're not gonna have our feelings. So when they abduct somebody and do these experiments, they might be looking at them the same way as when you were in junior high school and you had to dissect that frog in front of you.
Yeah, but the frog was dead. I mean, we didn't dissect live animals. They're doing this to live people, and they're also doing it to intelligent, well, most of them, at least sentient people. And so my attitude is, and if they're so advanced, then they know darn well what they're doing. So they're either amoral or they're immoral. Either implication is not good for us. I had one woman at a presentation I did in Baltimore say, well, they're so advanced they see us like ants. And I said, well, then it's up to us ants to look out for ourselves because obviously they're not doing it for us. So if people like to stomp on anthills and you're an ant, you may not be able to get them to stop by talking to them. So what do you do as an ant? You have to take care of yourself. build your anthills where they aren't around, or bite them
or something.
Try stomping on you. But essentially, it seems to me we're on our own. Space Brothers notwithstanding, they don't seem to be doing anything to help us. I mean, I have literally thousands of cases where people have been hurt, damages, injuries, deaths, military and civilian, and in multiple countries around the world, not to mention all these abductions, not to mention all the cattle mutilations, and not to mention all the permanently disappeared. In America alone, at least 50,000 people permanently disappear, and they are not accounted for by the normal disappearances you would expect, like kidnappings, one parent stealing the child from another, people running away from home, or people just wanting to start a new life, or people being murdered and their bodies disposed of. Even when you take all of that out of it, that still leaves about 50 to 65,000 people a year who are just vanishing from the face of the earth permanently. Now multiply that like around Australia, which has about 30,000 a year and a much smaller population of around 25 million, I believe, at present, and then around every other country in the world, and you have got literally hundreds of thousands of people permanently vanishing from the face of the earth every year. Where are they going? What's happening to them? And do they have any choice in the matter? Because if not, then I have to, for want of a better term, I would have to call extraterrestrials evil. Because if you're murdered or tortured, I don't give a darn what the reasons are. If that's being done to you, then you have to consider the people doing it to you as evil, bad, whatever you want to call it, malevolent.
Well, I think if they abduct you against your wishes, they're evil right there. I mean, they're breaking society laws. But, you're right about the amount of people. I was reading a report here recently that somebody furnished me from the FBI. They claim there's over 300,000 people that disappear a year worldwide.
Oh, yes. And it is about that number, but the thing is, we can account for a lot of those disappearances. My numbers and the numbers of the FBI, they say about 65,000. I was being more conservative in saying about 50,000. They can't be accounted for through all the usual means and measures.
Well, if they could, it would scare me that we have that many serial killers running around. But I don't think that's amount of people are being hit by, serial killers. I think that it was interesting is this, I was reading cases where a husband was going to go to, whatever for the day, go fishing. Well, never went to the fishing hole, never made it back. The wife went grocery shopping, or somebody traveling across the country on a road trip or a camping trip, just totally disappeared. No trace of anything, just gone.
No, and even David Paulides, or Paulides, however you pronounce his last name, his books, Missing 411, his series of books, and he was a detective, and originally, and he's claiming the same thing is happening in all our national and state parks, and he cites evidence to prove it. Now, sometimes the bodies are found, but they're always found under very strange circumstances and not in a location where they were searched for, or if they are found in that location, the area had already been searched thoroughly before, then suddenly here's this body lying there where they know they had looked already before. And and often they're missing items of clothing and shoes quite often, and they can't account for that either. So something is going on, and whatever it is, it's not good. And again, if you're one of the people that's abducted, and I have had people say to me, well, they do make you forget. So I said, yes, but you're still suffering from post-traumatic stress disorders, so that tells me that you didn't entirely forget. It was just suppressed. And again, it doesn't mean that you didn't go through it. And other people say, well, they don't mean evil. They're just doing experiments maybe to help us. I said, there's a lot of cases where it's not just the adult that's taken, but the children along with them. And how would you like it if your child was being subjected to this? Would you be that blasé about it? Would you say, oh, well, it's for a greater good? I don't think so.
I don't. Like I was telling you, I have pictures that was sent to me by a ex-government agent or employee of some mutilations of humans. And I'll tell you, after I looked at them, to be honest with you, Rob, I couldn't sleep for a night or two afterwards. I mean, I would try to sleep, and all I would do is get those pictures focused in my mind, and it was so disgusting that anything like that was going on. And no, I don't think they were fake pictures. Number one, two, like we were talking about going before we went on the air, the type of things like their eyes removed, their sex glands removed, their lungs and heart removed, all done like it would have been done in a hospital under laser, and